Hello, I'm Davia Brown.
I'm Brandon Lyles.
And I'm Stacy Loveland, and we're excited to have you join us for Colonial Williamsburg's CW Kids Ask,
where we dive deep into history.
Together, we'll explore 18th century life and connect it to present-day experiences.
We'll look at everything from fashion to science
and economy to archaeology. We'll take a closer look at our past and present.
Join us each month on our live streams and submit your own questions.
Or watch past episodes and start your own conversations.
The past has something for everyone.
So come join us
as we discover the past.
How did enslaved people resist enslavement?
Resisting is important because that is longevity.
There are various type of resistance. Some are passive and some are active.
I teach basically resisting by doing the work, but the work that you do is your humanity.
Resistance is to keep your soul, to survive, to live, because slavery, it's the worst stain that has ever placed upon this colony.
Good day. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of CW Kids Ask. This is our monthly live stream just for students where we will explore 18th century life and learn about the people, events, and ideas that helped shape America. Each month, we will bust some myths and misconceptions, explore primary sources, and answer questions that you send to us in the chat. I'm Brandon Lyles, and today we're going to be answering the question, how did enslaved people resist their enslavement? Joining me today are Janice Canaday and Willie Wright. Thank you both for joining us today. Why don't we get started by learning a little bit about you?
Hi, I'm Janice Canaday. I am a lifetime resident here in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I am currently the supervisor for the Peyton Randolph property and the historic area.
Hello, I'm Willie Wright. Good afternoon. I am not a lifelong resident here. In fact, I'm a geographical mutt, starting with DC, shout out Southeast, New Jersey, shout out Lake Valley Browns Mills, Virginia, shout out Lackey, Williamsburg, Newport News. I've been an actor, interpreter here at Colonial Williamsburg for about 15 years and also was an actor at Mount Vernon. Do a little script writing. Happy to be here. Thank you all for being here.
Well, once again, thank you both for being here. To get us started, let's define the two key points of today's discussion. Number one, what is enslavement, and also what is resistance?
All right, so enslavement is when you reduce a human being to a human piece of property, otherwise known as chattel property, movable property, because, well, they're human beings that shouldn't be on in the first place. But anyway, that means it's movable property. Resistance is non-compliant with your actions or your words, or then it could even be your gestures. Like, yes, that's it.
Ditto. Enslavement is when it's an institution that puts the condition of enslavement on you. Slavery is the institution, but the condition is enslavement. It's when someone else is controlling all of your being and owns all of you outwardly. Resistance is when you don't allow someone to own you from the inside out, when you control your mind, your reactions, and your actions.
And Virginia law in the 18th century classified enslaved people as real estate, is that correct?
There was a time when, when someone passed away, you could not only inherit their property, but the human property that was attached to it. You stayed with that house, with that plantation. And then, chattel slavery came along, so I can have you move where I want you to go, like a cow or like a horse.
So my next question is, why was resistance important for enslaved people?
Well, it was very important, but why? You had to assert your humanity because according to the law, they reduced you to something like a chair. or a horse, unless they wanted to punish you for a crime, which didn't make any sense. But the whole institution of slavery does not make sense. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
I believe you did.
Okay.
When people hear the word resistance, they often have a specific image of what that looks like in mind. We're going to take a look at a video that tells a little bit of a story about resistance.
You see, there was this lion. And we all know who the lion is in the animals. The lion, of course, he is the king of all the animals. But this particular lion had a faithful dog who was his faithful servant. He did everything that dogs do. They love to please their masters. On this particular day, the lion was quite hungry. And he said to the dog, "Dog, I'm hungry. Bring me something to eat." And of course, the dog, he's happy. He runs out and he gathers things that he thinks will tide the lion till he gets his next meal. He gathers fruits, nuts, berries, and all kinds of things you could find in the woods. He puts it on a platter and he presents this thing to the lion. The lion looks at the platter. The lion looks at the dog, and he looks at these things that was presented as food. He took his large paw and he knocked them away. And he said to the dog, "Dog, I am a lion. I eat meat. You bring me meat, or I'll eat you." Ooh, that frightened the dog. The dog was hurt. But the dog also knew what would happen to him if he didn't do what the lion told him. So the dog obediently and sadly goes off deep into the woods. He takes this arrow. He throws the arrow and he kills a hare, which is a large rabbit. And he brings this large rabbit about, and he's about to present this to the lion. But in walking back home from the woods, the dog sees something else. He sees all kinds of berries on the ground and in the trees. Now, these berries were poisonous, but the dog gathers these berries anyway. And he remembered what was said to him before he went to kill that large rabbit. He stuffs these berries into the rabbit. He remembered what was said to him that day. He remembered what was said to him the day before and the week before and even the month before. And so he continues to gather all kinds of berries and stuffs it into the mouth of the rabbit and keeps on doing it and stuffing it into this rabbit until the rabbit appears nearly 3 times its normal size. And with all these berries in the rabbit, the dog picks this large rabbit up, puts it over his back, and is about to carry this thing to the lion. The lion is looking and sees what he believes is a very large rabbit, something that's going to fill him up for quite a while. The lion runs and he charges at the dog. He sees the rabbit. He snatches this rabbit, and then the lion devours this rabbit. And the dog is waiting patiently and patiently and patiently until the lion falls down dead. Lion and the Dog is a story that can often teach people how to resist, particularly resisting being enslaved. The lion, being the powerful figure, can represent the master, mistress, or even governors who implement all these laws that say what enslaved folks can and cannot do, which is usually hardly anything. When we look into the dog resisting, the dog knows that he can't resist using force, but he's using his thinking abilities on how to overpower a situation that he thinks is abusive. And by using his wisdom to stuff, poisonous berries in a rabbit, that lets him know he didn't openly kill the lion, but he let the lion mistreat him again and ultimately came to his own end. And sometimes parents may teach their children who are enslaved, sometimes you have to use your brain and not your physical force or brawn to overpower a situation. Because if you use physical force, it can be met with the penalty of death. And so this is just one story that helps teach resistance. We can't say the lion represents master, but the children may know how we tell the story, the message that we're trying to get across to them.
Would you tell us a little bit more about how that story demonstrates resistance?
Well, it speaks to the enslaved people's ability to think and to reason and to create. They take it upon themselves to create stories that teach the children how to survive and resist the institution, how you're only enslaved if you believe you are, that you have much more to offer as a human being, and you have more talent and more gift and more treasure and value than what the owner says you have. But you use your smarts, your mother wit, to show how, regardless of what the master says or the owner says, I still have some agency over my life, and I still can react and resist, and sometimes get it past you, because I can sit right here and talk about the master or the lion and the dog, and you'll laugh and enjoy the story and won't even know it's about you at the same time.
I have nothing to add. It was answered perfectly.
Do you think if an enslaver had actually heard that story, that they may draw a conclusion as to which they were in the story? Which
I'm
animal?
sure there were times when there was that story could have been told where a master and slaver would have heard it and not liked the outcome because they're being outwitted by somebody that was supposed to be inferior to them. The lion would not have liked the idea, and probably didn't when he hit the ground after snatching that rabbit or hare that had been stuffed with those poisonous berries, because he's in charge. He's the king of the jungle and all the animals. Here, this lowly dog, his devoted servant, who's supposed to be so obedient, has outwitted him and got the aha. So.
And it's funny you brought that up. I was just speaking about that to someone else. Like, when you try to say that black people are inferior, this, that, and the third, when we prove to you that your stereotypes are incorrect, now you'll be trying to kill us for it. Kind of like a Rosewood in the Black Wall Street. They showed and proved that they could be self-sufficient and not just to survive, but to thrive. So the answer to that was to bomb them. And funny, they actually used planes from World War II, military-issued planes, to bomb those people.
We have seen one example of resistance through a story. Now we're going to see an example of resistance through a song and another story.
Ho, Emma, ho, you turn around, dig a hole in the ground. Ho, Emma, ho, I hear Emma, she's got a crush on Kofi. Ho, Emma, ho, well, Kofi ain't too happy about it. Ho, Emma, ho, 'cause Emma, she's got a great big head. Ho, Emma, ho, and Emma, she wants to have 60 children. Ho, Emma, ho, ho, Emma, ho. Now Kofi, he wants to run away. ho, Emma, ho. Well, it's too late, coffee, Emma's coming your way. Ho, Emma, ho. Ho, Emma, ho. Ho, Emma, ho. I'll never forget that song when we was growing up. You know, when Master made anyone hurt or sad, there was nothing we could do about it except sing. And it was those songs that got us through those hard times. But let me tell you something. Do any one of you know who Emma really is? That was his daughter. And did you hear what they said? She had a great big head. She wanted to have 60 children. And Kofi was so scared of it. Every time she came around, he wanted to run away. That was the only way that we could resist, by singing about it to get over our troubles. I'll never forget this story about Anansi the trickster spider and Miss Guinea Fowl. Oh my goodness, it was so wonderful. Let me tell you, Anansi was a trickster, always trying to get out of doing his work and trying to trick someone into doing his work for him. And so one day he knew that in all of the land that the number was cursed. It was bad. No one dare say that number. And so he planted this many yam hills, and he was waiting for someone to come by so he could trick them into saying that number. And lo and behold, he heard Miss Guinea Fowl just a singing, la, 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 it's a beautiful day. And then Anansi the trickster spider said, oh, Miss Guinea Fowl. And she said, why, yes, Anansi. Well, Miss Guinea Fowl, can you come and help me count my yam hills? And Miss Guinea Fowl said, why, sure. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, and the one right there on the end. Well, Anansi got mad because he wanted to trick her so that she would fall down and he could stew and have dinner that night and have stewed guinea fowl. So he started to get angry and said, Miss Guinea Fowl, you counted that wrong. And she said, well, I'll count them again. And then Anansi said, well, count them again. And he was getting madder and madder. And then she said, well, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, and the one right there. And when she didn't say the number, Anansi the trickster spider got hoppy mad. And that's when he said, you know what? You don't know how to count. Get out of my way. I'll do it myself. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Anansi fell down, never to be heard of again. And you know what? Guinea Fowl, she picked Anansi up. And that night, she had stewed spiders. So my mama said, whenever master and mistress try to make you mad or they try to upset you so that you will do something to get in trouble, just remember the story of Anansi and Miss Guinea Fowl, and always keep your wits about yourself and don't get upset and say something you'll regret.
Singing was not the only way to resist enslavement, but that was the choice for the woman in the video. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about how songs and stories represent resistance?
Well, songs and stories, just like you may have heard that song, I think that was on the lighter side of it. The song was basically blowing off steam, being able to say disrespectful things about the power structure of the household or plantation that you're on, and not suffering repercussions because they're not paying attention to it. But you know, those songs, drum patterns could be used for a lot of things because you could communicate news, you could maybe communicate several things and mask it into a song. I think that was just a light portion of it, but you can get the concept.
It also speaks to how quick-witted enslaved folks were, or enslaved Africans were. You know, you think that I'm lazy and shiftless and I can't think how to move from one spot to the other without instruction from my owner, but actually that's a good thing, because now let me show you what I can do, and it'll go over your head. You won't know nothing about it, but everybody in my community knows that I just talked about you or laughed at you in my own way.
Well, we do have a question coming in here from Susie, who asks, how did you come across these songs and stories? Were they just handed down through the generations, or were they written?
Some things you can listen to or read the Federal Writers Projects, where they actually have narratives that were written by or spoken by some of the people who had formerly been enslaved. For me personally, they came down from my mother or my grandfather, Wesley Brown, who told me things, who sometimes sang stories when he was chewing and spitting his thick-cut apple tobacco. So things that came from his childhood he shared, so actually from his mouth to my ear.
Mm-hmm. Which I would say it would be the same. My great-grandmother, her mother was actually born enslaved, and she's from Lackey, Virginia. Again, shout out Lackey. So not only stories I would get passed down, but ways to conduct yourself, respect, even their speech pattern. A lot of people would like to say, well, that was a long time ago. Nah, it wasn't. But, you know, say whatever makes you feel better, but it wasn't that long ago. So the way I got it was listening to stories from my grandparents, listening to their songs, even the hymns, things they sang in church could reach back to that very same thing. So yes, written, oral, and then some of the songs that you hear, the lyrics aren't ironclad. You could flip those lyrics to make it fit what you're going through. So yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful, diverse thing. Yep.
Think about some of the family reunions.
Right.
You know, when your family got together around the table at holidays, or you were in a space when you weren't supposed to be there, because when I grew up, you were supposed to be seen but not heard. But you'd be surprised what the elders would talk about, songs that were sings and little quips and jokes that would kind of slide out in conversation. And sometimes when they had enough to eat, you know, enough refreshment, they might elaborate on it. So that's where some of that stuff comes from too.
Excellent. We do have a question here from Emmanuel Lutheran School, the 5th grade class, who asked, what happened to enslaved kids if they refused an owner's request?
Anything the master wanted to do to them. There were no rules and parameters on what a master could do with his enslaved property. If they were old as dirt or as new as your last breath. Actually, the law states that a Christian, meaning white person, that's a whole after that, another live stream, they could kill their enslaved people as long as they were doing it in the form of correction. But if it wasn't correction, well, no one could go to court in the enslaved community against the masses, because the courts also stated that a Negro, Indian, or mulatto cannot testify against a Christian in court. So anything goes when you allow unnatural laws to dictate your society. But again, when you have the slave masters writing law, the laws benefit the slave master.
I think that's an excellent point to make. We do have a question here from Aaron, who asks, what is your favorite song or story from your childhood?
My favorite song from my childhood is One Nation Under a Groove. That was my favorite song. I didn't grow up in my house singing hymns, and my parents didn't attend church. So yeah, it was funk.
For me, it wasn't so much a story. It was listening to my mother sing when she was making her homemade yeast rolls in the kitchen. Her thing was to make me come in, and she had little things that she wanted me to do so that I would learn her recipe and how to make those rolls without her telling me. But she always sang spirituals in the kitchen because she always had to work on Sundays. Very seldom could she get a chance to go to church. And so she would have church in the kitchen, and we'd be singing Amazing Grace. And she loved to hear Mahalia Jackson sing. And if my brother Floyd was around, he would sing. And if you've ever heard Luther Vandross sing, Luther Vandross had nothing on my brother. And so he would sing that song and break it down the way that my mother would actually come to tears. And you actually had church in the kitchen.
Nice.
Beautiful.
That's excellent. We have a question here from Christopher, who asks, how did enslaved people survive enslavement?
How much time you all got?
It was in the stories and the songs. It was in the gatherings away in the woods and sharing their religion. It was in the sharing of their culture and creating new culture, talking about the traditions, talking about the folks who had come and shared pieces of memory with them, living memory, that gave them something to hold on to. It was in the resistance, in the masking your face, growing the gardens, making the corn husk dolls, giving a child a rock and telling them a story about it, or a shell, or some sunflower seeds, and tell them to go sprinkle along the water or somewhere in the corner that they could take place and grow, and know that when I'm not here, when those flowers come up every spring, that life keeps going, and that's me smiling at you. Old folks found all sorts of ways to teach you how to hold on and how to be strong, and let you know that even if folks weren't here, if you had the memory of those folks, they were always with you, and that their strength was part of you too. So it doesn't matter what came up against you, pull on that strength, speak their name, and you can survive too.
Mm-hmm. Or just living life in spite of it. It's like times you get to sit with your mother, and I'm sure, or grandmother, because I'm sure this scene probably unfolded with enslaved people. When I used to come down here, some of my favorite times was sitting on the porch with my grandma snapping peas and talking and all of that. So if you're enslaved, you get that time with your grandmother, your husband, your wife, your sister, brother, your children, to where I'm not a part of this. I'm in here in this small circle with my people, and I feel human. And those moments helped us pull through. Those moments also helped us have some restraint, because I know I don't want my ways or my actions to affect the people that I love. So that's how you survived. Like, not so much, oh, you said something to disrespect me. I would want to act on that in a certain way, but because I have people that I care for, I can suppress those feelings for the greater good.
We have another question from the Emmanuel Lutheran School. What is the youngest age for an enslaved child to be sold away from their parents?
I've read some things by Dana Ramey Berry, that talks about seeing documentation of sales of babies as young as 10 months. And I do know of being born several weeks later.
Yeah. What you have to realize, because I think that you all are looking for rules and guidelines. See, the thing about American slavery, there is no rules and guidelines. Even if they try to enforce it, it's impossible. Just like there's a myth that says that it was illegal to teach enslaved people to read. That didn't really come about until the 19th century, to be exact, 1832 is when it came into existence, because Reverend Nat Turner burned down Southampton County. But you can't regulate a private owner from teaching, I hate saying that, a slaveholder from teaching their enslaved people how to read. The same thing happened with them trying to enforce slave uniforms that was made of Osner bricks, some stuff that would have you itching like on cartoons. Y'all are fourth graders, right? You know when they start itching with the ants, That's how itchy that stuff was, but it could not be enforced because you gave these people dominion over these people, and you can't really determine how they deal with them on several different levels.
They did what they wanted when they wanted.
We have another question that asks, how often did slaves get fed?
I'm having difficulty with the question. Are they speaking of what the master provided for them or what they provided for themselves?
I say both. Let's talk both.
Well, as often as they got hungry, depending on the circumstance. But you have to be really careful. Even though you have the access to food, like say that you're a cook, depending on the household, you're starving, they catch you chewing, there's a consequence for that. Mm-hmm. But then, like I say, when I'm in character, it ain't wrong till they catch me. So if I'm putting myself in that position, how often do slaves eat? Enslaved people eat. It would be, if I'm hungry and there's opportunity, I'm going to eat. And I'm sure they felt the same way.
Well, this next question is something that we deal with here in Colonial Williamsburg. It comes up periodically. Were there any white slaves in America?
I beg your pardon, please.
There were indentured servants here, and sometimes in their writings, and they do have runaway ads where they actually run off too, but in some of their writings, they talk about being treated as badly or as worse as the enslaved, or they felt like they were being treated as badly as the Negroes, or the Negroes were treated better. You can be white looking and still be black in the time period we're talking about. So if people mean there are folks who were enslaved that look like they were white folks, that's a mixture of genes and DNA and things that are going on. Mm-hmm. Were there any white folks who were legally enslaved? No.
Because now, you know what? That leads me to a story. How do we start enslavement? Now, when the first Africans arrived to the New World, the first documented Africans that arrived in 1619, I would say that was real, but history's been plagued with so much I can't say when the first Africans got here. But the ones that are documented that were to be enslaved, when they landed, there were no laws here to support slavery on the books. So everyone that came over here in bondage started out in indentured servitude. Indentured servitude is basically you come to the New World, you're on contract for 7 to 10 years, you work and you're free. And see, indentured servants are not slaves because they're not stripped of their rights. It has a beginning and an ending. Mm-hmm. When you are enslaved, there is no beginning or no end for it because it starts before you're born. The law of 1662 said any child born to an enslaved woman is enslaved. So before they even take their first breath, they're enslaved. All right? So boom, what happened? This one day, 2 white indentures ran off with 1 African indenture, right? But all 3 were captured. The white men were given additional time on their indenture. They made the black man a slave for life. His name was John Punch, simply because he was easier to pick out of a crowd. And there we have the first case of racial profiling here. Yep. So short answer, no. White people were never legally enslaved in the United States or in North America before this experiment even began.
Thank you for those responses. We have another question that asks, were there masters who treated their slaves with kindness and respect?
There were masters who looked at their property differently because of the economic value. You don't destroy your property because that's your money maker. There are people who sometimes had some benevolence about them, yes, but in order to enslave you, I had to take you from something. I took you against your will. I took you from your country, your continent, your family, your village, your tribe. I'm going to erase your language, the way you dress, what you eat, how you speak, your languages, your name, your first gift from your parents. That's their expression of love for you. So when I take all those things, I can almost erase you. I try to reduce your humanity and strip your humanity away, but you can't take a person's humanity from them. That's impossible.
But you can take your own by trying to take someone else's. Mm-hmm. Because I've heard people say, oh, well, when they take the children from their crying mothers, they dehumanize them. No, you didn't dehumanize that mother. You dehumanized yourself. And on that good, bad slave master, there's no such thing as a good slave master. And I know some people try to make the concession or the excuse that, well, these men were just victims of their times. They didn't know any better, right? But let's examine that.
Did they know better?
Of course they knew better, because that's why you saw Jefferson and them saying, oh, what an abhorrent institution. But you kept doing it. But how do we find out right and wrong? For one thing, you know it in here what's right and wrong. But the other, religion gives us our moral compass or our sense of right or wrong. So let's examine that. The Torah was around long before American slavery. The Bible was around long before American slavery. The Quran. Now, and mainly the Christian Bible, because these men profess to be Christians, and one of the basic principles is do unto others as you would have them do.
The golden rule.
Indeed, but they weren't doing that. But so just asking that question, were there kind slave masters? It's like asking me, is there a kind murderer? Did you take him out to dinner or buy him a dress before you killed him? It's still enslavement. It's a rotten institution. And if they were good people, then they wouldn't mind flipping the script. Let me own you. Or let me own your mother, better yet.
So the answer is no.
Thank you. Our next question asks, if a slave owner died, would his slaves become free?
Not necessarily. You look at when George Washington passed away, he's going to have slaves that he will eventually release because of his will. But he also had those that he couldn't release because they didn't belong to him, they belonged to his wife. So she had stewardship over them. And then you get the mixture, which is really a mess, when some of his slaves married some of her slaves. Mm-hmm. So when you do become freed or emancipated, what happens when your family is still stuck in that institution? Mm-hmm. So it's not a guarantee unless it's in a will. And it depends on the time when they wrote the will, what the law actually said and what they had a right to do based on what the law said.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And in fact, Washington put in his will that Martha Washington was to free them upon her death. Mm-hmm. But she got afraid and went to a lawyer and freed them before. Now, I'm no fan of Martha Washington, but couldn't you just picture us sitting in the house and this man looking in here because you're standing in between me and my family's freedom? Yeah. I forgot the question.
That's a complicated situation to be in.
Yeah. Yup.
So are you automatically freed at the death of your owner, your master?
Yeah.
No, because the law says that you're a human piece of property. So what's going to happen to you, you're either going to be inherited or you're going to be auctioned off to pay debts. Mm-hmm. Because first they'll start with the furniture and the books, and then they move on down to auctioning off the people to pay debt. Yep. So if your master's dead and you hated him, you could be happy he was dead, but you wasn't going to get free.
Or you could be, or the flip side of that is, you could have hoped that he lived forever, because the evil you know is better than the evil that you don't know.
Yep.
That's a good point. Our next question asks, could slaves pay their way out of slavery to become free?
Yes, that is the short answer, but it's not. But the first point, you're putting yourself in a precarious situation, right? Because if you had that kind of money, because enslaved people weren't something that was very cheap. In fact, the richest people didn't even buy most of their enslaved people. They had a large slaveholding because of natural increase, because people tend to make more people, and that's money. But I tend to get off of the point. What was the question again? I've been doing this for a while.
Could they buy themselves out of
Yes, they can buy themselves out of freedom, but they would have to go to governor's council, get that approved, and have the money. But see, your master could just take your money, because legally, you're his property. That money belongs to him. But buying freedom, if I may, that leads to a whole nother thing. I've heard people say, well, black people own slaves. Yeah, but the devil was in the details. Sometimes if you're free, and you have to buy your wife who was enslaved, on paper, she is actually enslaved. You have to go to a whole nother court process to get her actually free. So in case someone tells you that, now you have the ammunition to be like, nah, that's not right.
Well, in point of case is Matthew Ashby.
Right. That's exactly what happened.
When he is released from his indenture, he has family, a woman that he calls his wife, and they have children together. So he goes to her owner, Benjamin Spur, and asks him about purchasing his family, because he wants to get them under the same roof with him. And so he gives him a price, I believe, 150 pounds for his family. That's a lot of money to have to come up with. But he does it. He does that. And then, so once he purchases his family, his wife and children, based on the law at that time, they're now his property, which makes him their owner, and they're his slave. So they're his slaves. So what he has to do now is find a way to get the governor's council to emancipate them and give them manumission papers. And so he writes a petition to the council. He has it presented to the council, and then he waits for their approval. And it does eventually get signed off. They do approve of it, but he dies a year later.
And thankfully he did that before, because had he passed away and those people, his family, were still enslaved, if he had any debts, his family would be right back into slavery.
And just to clarify one point for our viewers, starting in the 1720s, I believe 1723, became illegal to free an enslaved person, unless they committed some sort of meritorious act, and then it had to be approved by the governor and his council. This law stayed on the books until the 1780s. So not very many people freed under those particular conditions either.
And then you would have to be a real snake under those conditions. You heard him mention meritorious service. Two examples of meritorious service is saving your master from a burning building, or you could inform your master of a slave insurrection. So yeah, you're free, but you got free from slavery, but yeah, you still sold your soul to the devil. So what good is freedom then?
Well, let's switch gears a little bit, because we need to talk a little bit about some primary sources. Because when we study history, one resource that we often use is going to be primary sources. A primary source is an object created by a person or people who lived during a specific time period. By looking at primary sources, we can gain a deeper understanding of the people of the past and how they thought, felt, and acted. For today's primary source, we have an excerpt from a letter from George Washington to William Pierce about how several of his enslaved people feigned illness such as fatigue or lameness. Now, it is important to remember that slave owners are writing from their own biased perspectives about enslaved people. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, I could. It's like, I'll start out with this example. I remember I was going to school and I was angry because someone called me a name in school when I was talking to the teacher. And the teacher said, consider the source. I'll just say this I was an honor roll student. The other kid was a disruption in the classroom. So when I got called that name, they said, consider the source. So when you read these primary sources and they're coming from the perspective of people that thought that other people should work for them for free and they should own them for life, they don't have a very good opinion of life, and it's a very biased opinion. To say something about feigning illness, that's coming from the mouth of a man that feigns racial superiority because of his skin. Supposed to be a well-learned person. Like, you're all fourth graders. You can't say that all of one race is smarter than the other, because you've seen individuals outperform individuals, and it has nothing to do with race. It's a lot to it, and you would sound, to me, he sounds like a maniac because he's trying to justify the unjustifiable. What do you mean I've been known to feign sickness and being lame when all my work does is keep me in the same position and make you rich and you give me nothing? And then you speak about me like I'm less than you. No, I'm not trying to go to work. I wouldn't have went to the fields neither. I'd have been sick every time you saw me.
If you're working 14 to 16 hours a day, and sometimes, depending on the season, more than that, it wouldn't take much to be ill. You're always tired. You're never fully rested. You don't get enough to eat. And mentally and emotionally, you are zapped. So for him to say, or for your owner to say that you're feigning, that's really a stretch. Because how many people who are enslaved get up every day feeling like they want to go run a marathon?
Well, I'm not enslaved and don't want to do it now. But yes, you really have to consider the source. So basically, he's trying to call those people lazy by saying that they're pretending to be sick, not to work. And again, a main staple of racism is projection. How do you call these people lazy when they're working for you while you're not doing anything? You took people from across the world and brought them here to work for you because they were lazy? I'll let you think about that for a second and see how much sense that makes.
Well, we often hear a lot of different things about our past, and not all of those things are always true. Can you both tell us about a myth or a misconception that you would like to bust?
That was a good one just then when you talk about, or I'll just put it this way, when folks say that the owners took care of their people or they took care of their enslaved people. And my question has always been, how does that happen when they're laboring, like I said, 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day, from before the sun comes up to the sun goes down, from season to season, there's never a time of rest, and all that's government regulated. So they're taking care of the animals and butchering the animals and cooking your food and starting the fires and cutting the wood and clearing the land and stacking the timber, working the waterways, pulling the nets that pull the fish in, building the houses, making the bricks, nurturing the children, wet nursing children. So, and then they create your wealth, but they get nothing from it. You get the fine cuts of meat, they get the cast off and the scraps, but they have to take that nothing and make it a whole lot of something, and they do such a superior job of it that folks come back and grab it up and call it a delicacy. You know, so I'm just saying, how do you, where is the proof, where is the sense in them taking care of people who worked all the time for them from generation to generation to generation, and you fix the law so that you can enslave them and their children not yet born and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren who haven't been born into this world. So you make sure they're an inheritance for those generations of your own to come. So how have you taken care of them?
Right, right.
So I call that a bit of a myth or a stretch.
Agreed.
Outright lie.
Excellent.
I'll take the same question. The one I want to tackle is, your people sold you to us, meaning that when the Europeans came, we had a clearance sale of our own people. Hey, come on in, Europeans. We're going to sell you these fine Africans. That's not how it went, man. Number one, when you're on the continent of Africa back in the 17th century and beyond, that's an entire continent of black people. So skin color did not constitute a connection because everybody was black. Your people were in your tribe, and black skin was never taken into consideration. The concept of race was brought to the shores of Africa and North America by Europeans so that they could solidify superiority and stand above us. We didn't deal with race over there. And you can say that for Native American tribes and African tribes. In fact, just saying Africa, that's the name of a colonizer, because actually Africa and Asia are the same continent and it's separated just by water. So I can't really call myself African. I can say I'm from the motherland. Africa was not given to Africa by the indigenous people. It was given to them by a colonizer. 54 countries. So you know you live in the United States, right? You know how big it is? Now times that times 54 and tell me if all those people are connected. Shoot, most people don't even know their neighbor today.
Very true. It is necessary for us to learn about our American history. And we can't do that fully if we aren't learning about people who were enslaved. But we don't come to know who these people were by focusing on their enslavement or the work that they did for their enslavers. Enslaved men, women, and children never accepted their enslavement, and they all found ways to resist it every day. Thank you again to Janice and Willie for being a part of this live stream. And a special thanks to all of you for sending us such great questions and for having the courage to send us those questions. This project was funded in part by a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Join us again next month for our March 15th live stream. CW Kids Ask, how do we learn about women in colonial America? Until then, enjoy.